Hi there, I'm Sonia. Clarissa lived for the night. The loud music, the flashing lights, and the constant buzz of people around her made her feel alive. She loved the thrill of dancing until her feet ached, drinking until her head felt light, and being surrounded by people who seemed to live for the same fleeting moments of excitement. Her friends were more like accessories, people who came and went depending on the party, but never stuck around when the music stopped. And that was fine with Clarissa. She didn't need anyone to stick around, she was happy in the chaos. At every party, there was a new man. Someone who would notice her first, buy her a drink, and make her feel like she was the only girl in the room. But it never lasted past the night. Clarissa liked it that way, no attachments, no responsibilities. She'd wake up the next day, sometimes in her own bed, sometimes not, and begin the countdown to the next weekend, the next night out. The money she earned from her job barely lasted beyond the weekend. She worked just enough to buy new clothes for her nights out, to pay for drinks, and to cover the bare minimum of what she needed to get by. Every Monday, she'd show up to work late, her boss giving her that same disappointed look. But Clarissa didn't care. The job was just a means to an end, and that end was the next party, the next distraction. She couldn't even get a better job if she tried, always arriving too late, always too tired to give her work any real effort. And why should she? Life was happening at night, not in the daylight hours stuck behind a desk. Clarissa's mother had been watching this spiral since she was a teenager, and by the time Clarissa turned 21, she had reached her breaking point. A widow with 2 younger children to care for, she could no longer bear the sight of her daughter stumbling home at 7 a.m., smelling of alcohol and bad decisions. The house, which should have been a place of peace, had become a revolving door for Clarissa's reckless lifestyle. One morning, after yet another night of partying, Clarissa's mother waited for her at the kitchen table. The younger children were still asleep, and the house was quiet except for the sound of the front door creaking open as Clarissa slipped inside. She reeked of last night's perfume and cheap liquor, her hair disheveled, makeup smudged. Her mother looked at her with a mix of sadness and frustration. "Clarissa, we need to talk," her mother began, her voice steady but tired. Clarissa barely glanced in her direction, dropping her purse on the floor and heading straight for the fridge. "Can this wait until later? I'm exhausted," she muttered, pulling out a bottle of water. "No, it can't wait. I need your help," her mother said, her voice firmer this time. "You're 21 now, and I can't keep doing this alone. I'm working every day to support this family, and I need you to start contributing financially. I can't do this without you." Clarissa scoffed, leaning against the counter. "Help you? With what? Money? You know I don't make enough for that, and even if I did, do you really think I'm going to stop having fun just to play house? I have a life, Mom. I'm not going to give all that up to be miserable like you." Her mother's face tightened, the hurt visible in her eyes. But this wasn't new. Clarissa had been lashing out for years. What was new, though, was her mother's resolve. "If you can't help us, then it's time for you to go," her mother said, her voice low but firm. Clarissa blinked, surprised by the sudden shift. "Are you serious?" she asked, straightening up. "I'm serious. If you're not going to be part of this family, if you're not going to help, then it's time for you to live your life on your own. I can't keep watching you do this to yourself, and I can't have you in this house if you're not going to be a part of it." Clarissa felt the sting of her mother's words but refused to show it. "Fine," she spat, grabbing her purse off the floor. "I don't need you, and I definitely don't need this place. I'll figure it out." Without another word, Clarissa stormed out, slamming the door behind her. She had no plan, nowhere to go, but her pride wouldn't let her admit that. She was on her own now. Clarissa didn't waste any time after leaving her mother's house. She knew exactly who to call, the same people she'd spent countless nights with, drinking, dancing, and pretending the world outside the party didn't exist. One by one, she reached out, asking for a place to crash. The first 2 friends she asked turned her down quickly, giving vague excuses about not having space or not being able to afford another person. They weren't the kind of friends who stuck around when things got hard, just like she wasn't. But the third person, Jake, said yes. Jake was the type of guy who always had a couch full of people, a place where the party never seemed to stop. But even Jake had his limits. "You can stay," he said, leaning against the doorframe of his dingy apartment when Clarissa showed up, "but you'll have to pay half the rent and buy your own food. Don't touch anything in the fridge unless it's yours." Clarissa felt a flicker of annoyance but quickly swallowed it. She didn't have any other choice. "Yeah, sure. I can handle that," she said, forcing a smile as if the arrangement didn't bother her. Jake shrugged. "Good. But don't think this is some free ride. You pay, or you're out." Clarissa nodded, though deep down, she hated the idea of rules, restrictions. She'd left her mother's house to avoid all that, and now here she was, walking right into another set of conditions. But it didn't matter. She needed a place, and this would do for now. When Clarissa stepped outside the apartment building after her conversation with Jake, she paused and glanced back at the place she'd be calling home, at least for a while. The building was a run-down, grimy complex that looked like it hadn't been cleaned or repaired in years. Graffiti covered the walls, and a few broken windows were patched up with cardboard. A couple of guys were hanging around near the entrance, smoking and eyeing anyone who passed by. The place looked as dangerous as it did depressing, but Clarissa quickly brushed it off. This was temporary. She had other things to think about. With her new home sorted out, Clarissa went back to her mother's house one last time. She walked in, not saying much as she gathered her clothes, makeup, and the few personal items that were hers. Her mother stood in the doorway, watching her with a look of quiet sadness, but Clarissa ignored it. She didn't want to think about the guilt bubbling in the back of her mind. As Clarissa zipped up her suitcase, she glanced at her mother, her lips curling into a mocking smile. "I already have a place to stay," she said with a sneer. "I don't need this rubbish life anymore, and I definitely don't need to hear you nag me every day." Her mother's expression didn't change. She simply nodded, her voice calm as she spoke. "Despite everything, I wish you all the best, Clarissa." Clarissa rolled her eyes, refusing to let her mother's words sink in. She turned to the door, suitcase in hand, and with a smirk, tossed over her shoulder, "Keep your wish to yourself, because I don't need it." With that, she walked out, shutting the door behind her. The sound of it echoed through the quiet house, but Clarissa didn't look back. Not this time. She was convinced she was leaving behind a life she never wanted, heading toward the freedom she thought she craved. As the weeks turned into months, Clarissa's lifestyle only spiraled deeper into chaos. Her nights out became even more frequent. What used to be a weekend ritual had turned into an almost nightly affair. The parties, the drinking, the men, they all blurred together into one long stretch of reckless decisions. She was living for the moment, ignoring the growing consequences that were looming just out of sight. Jake's apartment, which at first seemed like a decent enough place to crash, had quickly become another source of stress. It was cramped, dirty, and constantly filled with people she barely knew. But even worse than that, Jake had made it clear from the beginning rent wasn't negotiable. And now, 3 months in, Clarissa had hit a wall. She didn't have her share of the rent. It was only $120, but to Clarissa, it might as well have been $1,000. She had spent the last of her paycheck on drinks and a new outfit for an upcoming party, not even thinking about the rent until Jake came knocking on her bedroom door. "Clarissa," Jake's voice was sharp, the door swinging open without a knock. "Where's your half of the rent?" Clarissa froze for a second, her mind racing. She had hoped he wouldn't ask, at least not yet. "I'm a little short this month," she admitted, trying to sound casual, as if it wasn't a big deal. Jake's face darkened, his anger clear. Short. I told you from day one, you pay or you're out. I don't care what's going on, you better have the money. Just give me a few more days, Clarissa pleaded, her tone shifting to desperation. I'll have it, I swear. I just need a little more time. Jake crossed his arms, glaring at her. 4 days, Clarissa. You've got 4 days to get me that money. After that, I'm done. Clarissa nodded quickly, heart pounding. I'll get it. I promise. But once Jake left the room, reality hit her. How was she going to come up with the money in 4 days? She barely had anything left, and her next paycheck wasn't coming anytime soon. Panic settled in as she thought about her options. And then, as much as she hated to admit it, her mind drifted back to her mother. It had been months since she left, and they hadn't spoken once. Clarissa didn't care, at least, that's what she told herself. But now, with the rent looming over her, she knew her mother was her only shot. Swallowing her pride, Clarissa decided to make the trip back to her old home. When she arrived, her mother answered the door, surprised but not entirely shocked to see her daughter standing there. Clarissa wasted no time. "Mom, I need a favor," she said, her voice flat. Her mother raised an eyebrow. "A favor? I need to borrow some money," Clarissa said quickly, trying to keep her tone nonchalant. "I'll pay you back." Her mother crossed her arms, studying Clarissa's face carefully. "You didn't say you needed me when you left," she said softly. "In fact, I believe you told me you didn't need my good luck wish either." Clarissa felt her stomach tighten. "Mom, come on, don't make this difficult. It's just $120. Her mother shook her head slowly, her expression firm but not unkind. "If you didn't need my good luck wish, Clarissa, you certainly don't need my money." Clarissa opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Her mother's calm refusal hit her harder than she expected. She had come here assuming she could guilt or charm her way into getting the money, but her mother was standing firm, not bending to Clarissa's whims anymore. "I'm sorry, Clarissa," her mother said, her voice gentle but resolute. "But this is something you need to figure out on your own." Clarissa stared at her, her heart pounding with frustration and disbelief. For the first time, the carefree shield she had built around herself was starting to crack. She was truly on her own. Clarissa left her mother's house feeling more frustrated than ever. Her mother's refusal to help echoed in her mind, but she pushed the thought aside as she headed to work. The tension of not having enough money to pay Jake was gnawing at her. As much as she hated to admit it, she was running out of options. When she got to work, her boss, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a stern demeanor, noticed something was off. Clarissa wasn't her usual carefree, distracted self. Her eyes were shadowed with worry, and she moved through her tasks mechanically. After hours of internal debate, she finally approached him during a lull. "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He glanced up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "Sure, what's going on?" Clarissa hesitated for a moment, biting her lip before spilling the truth. I'm in a bit of a situation. I'm short on rent this month, and I was wondering if you could help me out. I'll pay you back, I swear, just take it out of my next paycheck." The manager leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he looked at her. Clarissa had never been one to ask for favors, and he could see the unease written all over her face. After a long pause, he let out a sigh. "Clarissa, this isn't something I usually do. I run a business, not a bank." I know, she said quickly. "It's just, I don't have anywhere else to turn. It's only this once, I promise." He tapped his fingers on the desk, thinking it over. There was something in the way she asked, desperation mixed with vulnerability, that softened his usual hard stance. "All right," he said finally, pulling out his wallet. "But just this once. Don't make a habit of this." Relief flooded through Clarissa as he handed her the cash. "Thank you. Seriously, I won't forget this." "Just make sure you don't," he muttered, shaking his head as she walked away. Clarissa worked her shift in a haze, her mind racing as she thought about the rest of the month. When she finally got home that evening, she didn't waste time. She handed Jake the money she owed for rent. He took it without much comment, but there was a lingering tension in the air. Both knew this was a close call. That night, Clarissa tossed and turned in bed, her thoughts heavy with more than just financial troubles. For the past few weeks, she had been plagued by something else. Her period was late, 3 weeks late, to be exact, and she couldn't ignore the possibility any longer. The wild nights out, the reckless decisions with men she barely knew, and the lack of protection were starting to catch up with her. She couldn't even remember most of their names, much less what had happened in the haze of alcohol. The more she thought about it, the more fear gripped her. If she was pregnant, what would she do? She couldn't even manage to take care of herself, let alone a child. The idea kept her awake at night, anxiety gnawing at her, until finally, she couldn't avoid it any longer. A few days later, after work, Clarissa took a deep breath and bought a pregnancy test from the pharmacy. She sat in her bathroom, staring at the small plastic stick in her hand, her heart pounding in her chest. After what felt like an eternity, the result appeared. Positive. Clarissa's breath hitched, and her mind spiraled into panic. What am I going to do now? Clarissa kept her pregnancy a secret. It gnawed at her, but she continued living her life as if nothing had changed, working during the day, partying and drinking at night. For a while, it worked. Her belly hadn't started showing yet, and she convinced herself that as long as no one knew, she could keep things under control. Every drink she took helped numb the anxiety. Every night out let her push the reality further to the back of her mind. But the truth had a way of catching up. One evening, as Clarissa sat on the couch in Jake's apartment, absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone, Jake walked in from the kitchen and paused in front of her. He gave her a long, hard look, one that made Clarissa uneasy. She didn't like the way he was staring. "Clarissa," Jake finally said, his voice low and serious. "Are you pregnant?" Clarissa's heart skipped a beat. Her mind raced, trying to come up with a response, but nothing came fast enough. She looked up at him, startled by the directness of the question. Millions of thoughts flew through her mind, each one louder than the last. How does he know? Did I do something? Did I look different? She forced herself to speak, her voice sharp with defensiveness. "Why are you asking me that? What makes you think I'm pregnant?" Jake didn't flinch. His expression remained serious, his eyes locked onto hers. "Answer me," he said, his tone unyielding. Clarissa could feel the walls closing in around her. There was no way out of this conversation, no more pretending. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, but the words felt heavy as she finally said them out loud. "Yes." Jake shook his head slowly, disappointment etched across his face. "You see what happened, Clarissa? You're trying to live like there are no consequences, like you can keep going out, drinking, and pretending nothing matters. But it's caught up with you." Clarissa couldn't even argue. She just sat there, staring at her hands, feeling the weight of his words. "You need to find another place to stay," Jake said bluntly, his voice cutting through the silence. "I'm not dealing with this. You can't stay here." Panic gripped her. Jake was kicking her out. Her mind scrambled for a solution, but nothing seemed clear. "Where am I going to go? I haven't spoken to my mom in months. How am I going to tell her I'm pregnant?" The thought of facing her mother again after everything that had happened, after the way she had left, felt impossible. Clarissa felt trapped, her desperation growing with every second. Clarissa stood outside her mother's front door for what felt like an eternity. The nerves in her stomach were worse than anything she had felt before. She had run through this conversation in her head 1,000 times, but now that she was here, face to face with the moment, she was paralyzed. The old memories of her leaving in anger and slamming the door on her mother's wishes played over and over in her mind, but she had no choice now. She couldn't stay with Jake, and there was no one else she could turn to. Finally, after a deep breath, she knocked on the door. Her mother opened it, surprised to see Clarissa standing there after so many months. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at her daughter with a mixture of surprise and caution. "I need to talk to you," Clarissa said, her voice barely above a whisper. She could already feel the tears building up behind her eyes. Her mother stepped aside, letting her in without a word. The house was the same, but somehow it felt different, quieter, colder. Clarissa sat down at the kitchen table, the same spot where they'd had their last argument months ago. Her mother sat across from her, waiting for her to speak. "I'm pregnant," Clarissa said quickly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I'm pregnant, and I have nowhere to go." Her mother's face softened slightly, though her expression remained firm. She didn't seem shocked, but there was a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. "And now you're here," she said quietly, asking for a place to stay. Clarissa nodded, her voice shaky. "I don't have anywhere else, Mom. Jake kicked me out. I've been going out, drinking, doing the same stupid things, and now I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. I need help." There was a long silence as her mother considered the situation, her eyes never leaving Clarissa's. Then, with a deep sigh, she spoke. "You can stay here, Clarissa, but only under my terms. The party is over." Clarissa's heart pounded as her mother continued, her voice steady and firm. "If you stay, you're going to help with rent, cleaning the house, cooking, and doing your part just like everyone else. You'll take responsibility, because I'm not going to let you come back here and expect a free ride. This isn't going to be easy, and it's not going to be fun. You can't live the way you've been living anymore." Clarissa didn't hesitate. She knew there was no other option. "I'll do it," she said quickly. "I'll help with everything. I just need a place to stay." Her mother looked at her for a long moment, her face softening just slightly. "All right," she said finally. "You can stay. But remember, this is your last chance, Clarissa. I hope you take it seriously." Clarissa nodded, her mind racing with relief and fear all at once. She knew her life was about to change dramatically, but for now, she had a place to stay. As the months passed, Clarissa's life took a turn she never expected. Her pregnancy came and went, and soon enough, she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl she named Andressa. At first, it seemed like everything might fall into place, that maybe motherhood would shift something inside her. But the reality of it hit hard, and it didn't take long for her to feel the weight of her decision. One night, as she lay in bed exhausted, Andressa's cries pierced through the stillness. Clarissa sat up, her body aching from the endless cycle of feeding, changing, and soothing. But this night was different. She couldn't shake the bitterness that had been growing inside her. "This isn't what I wanted," the thought screamed louder in her mind with every wail of her daughter. Clarissa stared at the ceiling, overwhelmed with frustration. "I didn't sign up for this. I didn't want this life." The longing for her old ways, the freedom of the nightlife, the parties, the thrill of living without consequences, those memories flooded her mind, clouding her thoughts. She felt trapped, and Andressa's cries only deepened her resentment. The next morning, with her mind made up, Clarissa left the house early. She walked through the city streets with a sense of purpose, her decision becoming clearer with every step. By the time she reached the adoption office, she had already convinced herself that this was the right choice. "I'm not cut out for this. I was never meant to be a mother." She filled out the necessary forms to put Andressa up for adoption, her heart numb as she did so. 2 months passed, and a couple expressed interest in adopting her daughter. They were well off, capable of giving Andressa a life that Clarissa couldn't provide. A house visit was conducted, and the couple was approved. 2 weeks later, the day arrived for Clarissa to finalize the adoption. Clarissa sat in the sterile office, the adoption papers laid out in front of her. Without any hesitation, without a shred of remorse, she signed her name on the dotted line. Her mind was made up. This is for the best, for both of us. The couple, who would be taking Andressa to another country, would give her the life Clarissa could never offer. The handover was set for the next day. Clarissa returned home that night, the decision weighing on her less than she expected. She waited for her mother to leave for work the following morning, and once the house was empty, she began packing her things. She bundled Andressa in a blanket, packed her own bags, and made her way to the door. Before she left, Clarissa took a pen and paper from the kitchen drawer and scribbled a note. She laid it on the table, her heart cold, but her mind clear. "Mom, thank you for helping me, but the time has come for me to leave. I want you to know that I put Andressa up for adoption, and today she goes with her new parents. Mom, I wasn't born for this life of being a mother. I like my style of life, and I'm still too young to be tied down. That's why I made this decision. It will be better for Andressa. Her new parents have money and can give her what I could never offer. Clarissa." With that, she walked out, her mind set on moving forward and reclaiming the life she thought she'd lost. Tell me in the comments below, would you have the courage to do what Clarissa did? Thanks for watching.